Now, please join me in welcoming Mick Veitch to the lectern. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaket. And just so you know, if the bells ring, people will come and go. That's just the way this place operates for those who have been. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we stand on, and I want to pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging. And Shaket, thank you for those kind words. Shaket and I have been in the upper house most of the time together, and you know, politics is by nature, you win some, you lose some, and you know, we always roll the arm over and go pretty hard. So it is my great honour to be here today to launch the book, John F. Kennedy, a reference guide to his life and works, written by Professor Ian James Bickerton. You may note I've had a chance to go through an earlier version. I got the version a bit early so I can actually prepare this. This book is the complete encapsulation of JFK. It showcases his essence and spirit and documents his remarkable life and presidency. It is a miscellany of information and facts all about JFK. It begins with a very comprehensive chronology of his life and is followed by an introductory chapter that provides an insightful summary of JFK as a person, his many remarkable traits, and also touches on his flaws. The rest of the book is composed of individual alphabetised entries that cover people and events that are integral to the Kennedy era. And as you read through the book, there are names there that it just brings back sort of memories and sort of stories. I was born in 1962, so the stories you've heard or read, and it's just one of those great books. It all comes there. It's really good. It covers with people and events that are integral to the Kennedy era. Each entry is only considered in how it or they relate to JFK, which makes this book a wonderful starting point for anyone wanting to learn more about this remarkable man and his place in history. There's also an in-depth appendix and a selected bibliography. The appendices contain the transcripts of many of JFK's most famous speeches, fascinating reading in their own right. Ian has also provided very clear cross-referencing guides, so you can really go down into that rabbit hole if you wish, from one subject to the next if you want to. Maybe a JFK Google. Reference books are primarily intended for occasional consultation. However, as I found with this book, it's so captivating and well written that it actually lends itself to continuous reading. You know, one entry after the other, you work your way through it, you don't put it down. The introductory chapter seeks to explain why this president had, and still has, such a momentous hold on history. How he was the first president to use the technology of television to his advantage. How his vibrancy and promise of prosperity and peace cut through the ageing and uninspiring administration of the day. How he gave politics the appearance of being a noble endeavour. It also describes the many challenges he faced in his short time in office. The Bay of Pigs invasion, the Cold War, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and perhaps the most disastrous episode in US foreign policy, the beginnings of the Vietnam War, which, as Ian questions late in the book, in the Vietnam War entry on page 228, for those that want to go and have a look, did Kennedy intend to reduce the level of US involvement in Vietnam and withdraw from conflict? What is certain is that he didn't intend to do so until after the 1964 election, so as not to appear weak on communism. The introduction also details Kennedy's domestic policy agenda. It explains the swift action he took to turn around an economy that was in trouble. The US was in the midst of its fourth major recession since World War II. When he took office, there were 5.5 million people unemployed, and business bankruptcies were the highest since the Great Depression. JFK increased the minimum wage, he extended social security benefits and authorised loans and grants and technical assistance to struggling industrial and rural areas. These measures meant he slowed the recession in his first year in office. Perhaps the most burning issue domestically at the time was the civil rights movement and equal rights for African Americans. Frequently mentioned throughout the book was Kennedy's cautious approach to the civil rights movement. He did, however, use his executive powers to advance the situation. He desegregated transport terminals, he appointed African Americans to high office, he improved the employment policies of companies that had government contracts and directed Bobby Kennedy as Attorney General to combat restrictive voting laws. He also took action to desegregate schools and universities, which is explained in detail on page 30 under the Ross Robert Barnett entry. Barnett was the governor of Mississippi at the time, and he denied James Meredith, a 29-year-old African-American US Air Force veteran, admission to the University of Mississippi. President Kennedy entered into behind-the-scenes negotiations to try and work out a solution. There were 3 separate phone calls with 3 separate scenarios, one being that Barnett would physically block Meredith and his US Marshal escorts from entering, but he would retreat once the marshals drew their guns. Barnett abandoned all scenarios, so Kennedy took action to federalise members of the National Guard who escorted Meredith through the protesters, and he was finally enrolled in university. Also interspersed throughout the book is mention of JFK's interesting attitude toward women. It was repeatedly cited that whilst he was not an opponent of equal pay or equality in general, he was not an advocate for women in any real sense. Indeed, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a revised version of JFK's earlier unsuccessful bill, only included women because of the advocacy of a Virginian segregationist representative by the name of Howard W. Smith, who incidentally was opposed to civil rights protections for African Americans. Maybe Ian can elaborate on that quandary. On page 241, Ian depicts an interesting observation about Kennedy's relationship with women, and I go on to quote, "At one party at which Kennedy complained that Adlai Stevenson II possessed a hold over women that he did not, Clayton Fritchley, who was Stevenson's deputy at the United Nations, explained, while you both love women, Adlai also likes them, and women can tell the difference." I think it is a great example of how Ian has presented the information in the entries in an honest and succinct way that doesn't hide any of JFK's faults, but allow you to draw your own conclusions. This book also touches on how many of the problems faced by JFK and his administration are much the same problems faced by legislators today. There was something that stayed with me when I read through, the entries. It was so interesting as a current legislator to see how the issues and problems and indeed solutions were negotiated in the past. Ian also discusses how many of the characteristics of political office today are the result of Kennedy-style initiatives. JFK was the one to increase imperial presidency, a term coined by Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr., used to describe the expansion of power of the president over Congress beyond what was ever originally conceived. Imperial presidency arose in response to foreign relations, but Kennedy was the one to enmesh it into office. He also increased the power of presidential advisors and integrated technology and mass media into politics. Kennedy's awe-inspiring oratory style, something I do not possess, and presence was also one of great interest to me, frequently mentioned throughout the entries in this book. I found the entry about Theodore, Ted Sorensen, page 205, fascinating. He was Kennedy's chief advisor and speechwriter, and was responsible for many of the legendary quotes connected to the president, such as, "The torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans." And of course, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." Sorensen was also the author of JFK's American University speech in June 1963, entitled "A Strategy of Peace," and is considered to be one of the most powerful speeches of JFK's presidency. The speech outlines a peaceful strategy to curb the nuclear arms race. The transcript was not included in the appendices, something I must say I was a little surprised about, Ian. And you know, I had to find something to match Bob, who launched the book on the Southern Highlands, who also, I think, found something that wasn't in the book that he thought was in the book.
It was that speech.
Ah! Okay. Oh well, there you go. Anyway, I'm sure you had good reasons to exclude it, and perhaps just the sheer volume of the good subject matter you had to consider. JFK also frequently sought Sorensen's advice on foreign policy matters. Robert Kennedy is quoted in the book as saying, "If it was difficult, Sorensen was brought in." In our current drought, water security is of paramount concern, so I read with interest the entries about Wayne Norville Aspinall, page 19, a Democrat from Western Colorado who introduced water reclamation policies and legislation, and also the entry about George David Aiken, page 7, a Republican from Vermont who sponsored the Water Facilities Act that provided federal aid to rural communities seeking to develop adequate water supply. Interestingly, we've just passed a bill through both houses of this Parliament this week, looking at putting in infrastructure to get critical water needs to communities in New South Wales that have or are about to run out of water. Not a topic I personally was expecting to come across the book, but about JFK, the water issue, but I think is a prime example of the depth and breadth of the information and research contained in this book. As you read the entries in the book, you will see how varied the subject matter is, from Bob Dylan, page 73, to James Baldwin, page 27. You realise just how much Ian has condensed into 303 pages, and to have condensed such an integral part of history into an ordered topology is incredible and no mean feat. The order and accessibility of the book makes it easy for researchers, and indeed everyone, to better understand this period in time, especially for someone like me who needs order. Things are colour-coded and have a rhyme and reason to them, and anyone that knows me knows that that's how I work, to make sense of things. It's a tribute to the author that he has pursued this history and captured it in such an entertaining yet succinct way. I think this is what makes this a point of difference between this book and other historical records about JFK. I would even suggest it fills a gap in the JFK canon. In no particular order, I'd like to mention a few facts I learned from the book which piqued my interest further in JFK, and which I hope may well interest you as well, as Chiquette says, once you buy the book. JFK founded Peace Corps. He had a ghostwriter, Ted Sorensen, for his Pulitzer Prize-winning book Profiles in Courage, which describes acts of bravery and integrity by 8 United States senators. He had a brief stint as a journalist and covered the first meeting of the United Nations. He couldn't do the twists because of his back problems, and was actually quite disappointed about that. I think it is really worth mentioning that his sister, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, founded the Special Olympics. Ian also goes into great detail of JFK's advocacy for people with a disability, a passion that came from watching his sister Rosemary struggle with disability. I learned so much from this book, I could go on, but I won't. So, who is the author behind this beautifully written piece of work? Ian James Bickerton is an honorary associate professor and former member of the School of History at the University of New South Wales. He has an impressive list of credentials and academic qualifications, including a Bachelor of Arts Honours from the University of Adelaide, an MA from Kansas State University, and a PhD from the Claremont Graduate School in California. Throughout his distinguished career, he has authored and edited 9 books and several articles. So just so Chiquette will now leave the room.
I'll leave the task to you. I'll come back.
Okay. The bells have a different tone. So upper house, lower house, different. That's how they know which of the MPs will leave the room. Throughout his distinguished career, he was authored and edited 9 books and several articles in United States diplomatic history and the Arab-Israeli conflict, which he is regarded to be the most balanced author on, a trait which I must say is carried over into this text. In closing, I would like to acknowledge that Ian wrote this book with the hope that we, as readers, will take away some new knowledge about JFK, and above all, will take away a knowledge of the all-pervading impact this impressive character had on the 20th century. Considering the depth of knowledge and careful consideration of the entries of the book, there's no doubt this will be the case. Chiquette mentioned people were a bit surprised about my interest in JFK. It's long held, and I've had the opportunity to go to Arlington and stand at that really quite fantastic memorial for JFK. But what I will say is that when you walk around the corner, there's a single cross for Bobby, and the contrast between the two memorials is quite substantial and quite moving. I commend Ian for this wonderful book. Ian, thank you very much, and I believe you've got a moment to say a few things to him about your book. Ladies and gentlemen, Ian Bickerton.